In the latest attempt to turn us from a republic to a socialist nation, Bernie Sanders is trying to take control of your health care. We'll take a closer look at this and his proposed text next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Well, hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study. I'm glad you could join me where we read and study the Constitution and teach the rising generation to be free. Today we're going to talk about Bernie Sanders' proposal, but as always, head over to that website, constitutionstudy.com, for all information about the Constitution Study. Reading articles, listening to podcasts, watching videos, even seeing where I'm going to be speaking, and who knows, ask questions, make comments. This is to be an interactive environment, and I hope that you will help participate. I want to thank those who help support the work that we're doing, Restore the Intent, Conversations on the Culture, helping me get more information and put this out to a wider audience. And I hope you'll join me if you're in the Georgia area. I'm going to be at the North Georgia Christian Education Conference on June 8th. I'll have a booth and a speaking opportunity, so hope you'll see you there. If you do, please make sure you stop by and say hello. I had a couple of people say they stopped by, but I was busy. They didn't take the time to say hello. I hope you'll take that time. I really enjoy meeting you out there. So today, let's take a look at Mr. Sanders' Medicare-for-all program. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this lately. Most of it seems to be focusing on the political, economic, and logistics realities of this particular piece of legislation. But we're the Constitution Study, so we want to take a look at the constitutional questions. So let's get the easy one right off the bat. There is no power delegated to Congress to establish a national health insurance program. None, nada, zip. It is illegal. It's unconstitutional. In fact, Congress has no power to do anything with health care except to make interstate travel regular. So to make sure that interstate commerce, I should say commerce, not travel, interstate commerce related to healthcare, they can set rules for how it's done interstate. That's it. Now, I don't know if Mr. Sanders is aware of this, but any legislation Congress passes that is in violation of their powers in the Constitution is void. Yeah, don't take my word for it. Let's take a look at a couple of our early Americans and see what they had to say. Alexander Hamilton said in Federalist 78, "There is no position which depends on clearer principles than that every act of a delegated authority, contrary to the tenor of the commission under which it is exercised, is void. No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. To deny this would affirm that the deputy is greater than the principal, that the servant is above his master, that the representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves, that men acting by virtue of powers may do not only what they powers do not authorize them to do, but what they forbid." See, this is a perfect example. See, to say that a legislative act contrary to the Constitution has any power is to say that the representatives are superior to us. We, the people, are the sovereigns in this nation, not Washington, D.C. They are the servants. We are their masters. We should start acting like that. The very act of them doing this, not only that doing what they are not allowed to do, but what they are forbidden to do, is because we won't hold our servants accountable. We used to call them public servants. Now they act more like masters. And this isn't just Hamilton. In Marbury versus Madison, which federal supremacists and judicial supremacists love to quote as, well, the Supreme Court gets to determine, whether or not this legislation would be constitutional. Well, look at what Chief Justice Marshall said in that opinion. Certainly all those who have framed written constitutions contemplate them as forming the fundamental and paramount law of the nation. And consequently, the theory of every such government must be that an act of the legislature repugnant to the Constitution is void. The Constitution gives no authority to Congress. And in fact, the language of the bill doesn't even pretend that the Constitution grants Congress this power. Sometimes they'll throw in some language like, well, it's authorized under, Article 1, Section 8. Yeah, which clause, which power? That's like saying, hey, look at my phone book. Where? Well, it's in the phone book under E. Okay. In fact, a quick search of the text of the current version of the legislation shows no reference to the Constitution, much less a specific reference to the source of their authority. They're not even claiming that the Commerce Clause or the General Welfare Clause or even the Necessary and Proper Clause, they're not even claiming these are authority. They simply act like it's theirs, which is a much more dangerous effect. Well, you're saying, what could be more dangerous than Congress passing unconstitutional laws? This point of view of so many in Washington that they are the boss. See, we forget that when we declared independence, we said we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. See, when we separated from Great Britain, our founding fathers did so on two very basic principles. First, that the people individually have certain unalienable rights, things that the government is not allowed to touch. And second, that those people establish governments to protect those rights. So tell me, what unalienable right is Mr. Sanders protecting with this legislation? Well, some people may say he's protecting the right to health care. But you cannot have a legitimate right to health care. You can't. See, the only way to exercise such a right requires that you infringe on the rights of others. Are you going to force doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers to work for free? Are you going to force medical supply companies to give away their products? Are you going to force the gas, electric, and internet service providers to provide their services for free because you have a right to health care? What do we call people who are forced to work or to provide services to others? We call them slaves. Now, some of you may say, we won't force people to work. We'll just pay them out of the tax dollars. This isn't any better. First, then you put those in government in charge to decide who gets paid and how much, regardless of what the services actually cost. But even worse, you take money by force to provide a service to others. This legislation would be further enslaving the American people to pay for other people's services. And since this would be done by government, it would be done by force. It comes with the threat of fine, the threat of imprisonment, and if you fight it, potentially even having people with guns come after you. Now, what do we call people who force others to pay money or else, under threat of violence? We call them extortioners. So if you support this idea of Medicare for all, are you a slaver? Are you an extortioner? Or are you both? But if we go further, if we look closer at the legislation, we find it's not about making sure you have health care at all. It's a canard. It's about making sure you are dependent on the federal government. What do I mean? Well, look at Section 107. It says, beginning on the effective date in Section 106A, it shall be unlawful for a private health insurance to sell health insurance coverage that duplicates the benefits provided under this act, or an employer to provide benefits for an employee, former employee, or the dependents of an employee or former employee that duplicate the benefits provided under this act. In other words, you won't have a choice. You won't have a choice of where to get your health care. It'll be determined by the government. You won't have a choice of how to pay for your health care. It'll be paid for by the government. Want something that's a little more expensive? Too bad. See, the government will be the sole provider for whatever health care they deem proper for you to have. They will decide what will be paid for and under what circumstances. Getting older and need an operation, the government will decide whether or not they're going to pay for that. Have a disease that has some special drug, the government will decide whether or not they'll pay for that. Oh, you don't like what the government offers? Too bad. See, the government is going to make it illegal for you to get coverage elsewhere. You want coverage that will provide elder care or will provide those more exotic drugs? Too bad. It will be illegal for them to sell it to you. Does your employer want to offer you better coverage as an incentive to keep working for them? Nah, so sad. It will be illegal for them to do so. Oh, and if you don't want to pay for something covered by this government-mandated plan, yeah, then you go to jail for not paying your taxes. Does this sound like providing health care, or does this sound like controlling the American people? This so-called Medicare-for-all is nothing but a Trojan horse, an attempt to get you to accept government dictating to you how you should live your life. There's a saying in the modern culture, if you don't pay for the service, you are the service. Well, with this legislation, you are the service. You will be selling your rights as an American to live at liberty, without government control or coercion, all for the promise that you will get free health care. You know, there's another much older saying. You get what you pay for. The cost of this legislation will not only be measured in dollars, and those will be massive, trillions, but it'll be measured in the rights and freedoms you and your children will lose because the government will dictate more and more of your life. So the next time the snake oil salesman comes and promises you the latest miracle cure-all, remember one other very old saying: buyer beware. Or better yet, let's take some advice from those who declared our independence over 240 years ago. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall deem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. We don't need to keep this government. If this government is destructive to protecting our rights, it is past time, we alter it. And if we can't alter it, it's time to abolish it. Now, I want to do this at the ballot box. I want us to turn to the Bernie Sanders of the world and say, no, you cannot take control of our lives. You cannot bribe us with our own money. You cannot dictate to us what we shall and shall not do. You work for us, not the other way around. And get your hands out of our pockets. And by the way, if you support this type of taxation, you get your hands out of my pocket. It's time for us to start acting like Americans again, to be self-reliant, to not look for the government to baby us, and certainly not look for the government to tell other people how they should live their lives, because that same government's turning around and telling us how we should live our lives. This is not providing health care. This is stealing your health care. This is stealing your freedom. This is stealing your liberty. This is stealing what makes us Americans. To live at liberty, without coercion, without control, without dictates coming from Washington. And it's about time we stand up and say, no more. I've had enough. I can't take any more. This stops, and this stops now. So I hope when someone comes and says, oh, well, Medicare for all, that'll just be wonderful, you show them just how ridiculous and stupid such a saying is. You ask them if they're willing to sell their right to free speech, to not be invaded by the government in order to get some healthcare system that I don't know. Do you really want your health care run like the VA? Does anybody remember how the scandals of how badly our veterans have been treated? What happens when it's just the American people? And that's what you're gonna sell your rights for? Crappy health care? Healthcare like they have in Canada and UK, where you have to wait months to get an MRI that may help them diagnose a life-threatening disease? Do you may have to wait years to get an operation you need? Is that what you're going to sell your freedom for? That's what they're asking us to do. And that's what it's time for us to say, no. So get up on your hind feet. Talk to your senator. Talk to your representative. Talk to your state people. Stand up and say, no, we will not let Congress take any more power. And if that's the way they want to go, it's time to vote the bums out. We have to decide if we're going to be the land of the free or if we're going to be the land of the serf. And it's time we really start making that decision now. So take this, get fired up, talk to people, talk to your representatives, start holding them accountable. Don't wait for November 2020. Start now. Get to their office, get to their people, get in their face, and let them know that you're not going to sell your freedoms anymore. Hopefully now you're excited. You're ready to go out and stand up and stop letting them steal your life, your liberty, and your freedom. It's time for us to alter this corrupt government, and we do it when we, the people, take responsibility for our government and those people who represent us. So head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. Check out more. Find a Constitution study group. Please, if there's not one in your area, start one. Read this, start learning this for yourself so we can start taking control of our government again. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves serfs. And we're going to have to explain to our children and our grandchildren not only why they no longer live in a land of the free, but why we sold their future down the river for pittance. I hope you got it. I hope this had you engaged. I hope you'll head over to the website, and I hope to see you again next time on the Constitution Study. Have a good day.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand.